Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin. Dave, please go ahead.
Well, thanks, and hello. My name is David Port, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, The Unintended Consequences of Technology Change and IT Downsizing. This event is brought to you by Inside Counsel and sponsored by Iron Mountain and Trusted Data Solutions. Before we turn to today's program, I have a few details I'd like to share with you. To make today's event as interactive as possible, we encourage you to engage your networks via some simple-to-use social media tools. You can tweet your thoughts on the proceedings today in real time via Twitter or post them directly to your Facebook or LinkedIn page, all right from the presentation console on your computer screen. No need to open a new browser screen to do that. Simply scroll along the bottom of the screen and click on the social networking widget of your choice. And we encourage you to have some fun with that. Also, if you have a question during today's discussion, feel free to enter it in the Q&A widget on your console anytime during the event. We've set aside some time later in today's discussion to address your questions, so please do ask away. I also want to point out the customizable functions on the presentation console. Every widget that you see on screen, from the slide window to the Q&A panel, can be either enlarged or collapsed, so feel free to adjust the look and feel of the console according to your viewing preferences. And one more thing to mention, and that is to check the resources area of your console for access to some takeaway materials that are relevant to today's event. And that's about it for housekeeping items. Let's turn to the reason that we're here today, to talk technology and how to manage its impact on our organizations. Ready or not, technological shifts are part of your organization's present and its future. Maybe your IT department is moving systems to the cloud. Maybe it's consolidating data centers or migrating data following a merger or an acquisition. How do moves like these affect your accessibility to that data? Today we're going to talk about the consequences, both positive and negative, of moving to new technologies, with a look at how to manage the impact of those moves from a legal and compliance perspective. Among the issues we'll touch on, how to dialogue with IT about technology changes and ask the right questions so the entire organization is ready when those changes hit, how moving to a new technology might impact data retrieval. We'll also be touching on how to ensure the data retrieval process is not only repeatable but defensible. And we'll also address real-life examples of how organizations are learning to deal with this issue. And with us today to delve into these issues and more are two experts in the field. We have John Sharp of Iron Mountain and Chris Clark of Trusted Data Solutions. John Sharp is Director of Product Management for Iron Mountain's data management business. In that role, he's responsible for developing and implementing strategies for backup, disaster recovery, and archiving. John has more than 15 years of experience in engineering, corporate strategy, and product management. We're also joined by Chris Clark. Chris is President and CEO at Trusted Data Solutions, or TDS for short. For more than 2 decades, TDS has been providing data-related services to corporations around the world, innovating in areas like e-discovery and information management. Based in New York City with offices in the UK, TDS offers tape restoration, email processing, voice log and voicemail processing, and legacy data conversion services. So with that, gentlemen, I'll turn the program over to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. Thanks, Chris, for joining, and thanks, everyone, for taking the time to listen to the webinar today. Iron Mountain and TDS have a long history of partnering to help our customers address some of their most difficult data management challenges, especially when it comes to restoring data from legacy and aging media. Chris and I are both excited to share some of our collective observations and recommendations in the space. I think we jointly believe that it's critical for legal and the business to be involved heavily alongside IT when it comes to data management decisions. So let me start with a brief introduction to Iron Mountain and explain really where some of our data management perspective comes from at a high level. We manage information for about 94% of the Fortune 1000, and we have more than 18,000 data management customers globally. So we're in this business day in, day out with our customers. We're constantly evolving our solutions to meet the needs, the data management needs of our customers globally. We've been working as a trusted partner with many of our customers for decades, and we've seen evolving challenges across all industries, whether it's financial, legal, healthcare, manufacturing, entertainment, and what have you. We've helped our customers rapidly advance their programs, adapt their programs, and we've been constantly evolving ourselves. So between our broad and deep experience, our top quality logistics and service, and our firm focus on data protection, we've seen and we understand data management best practices, and we're really excited to share some of those today. I mentioned that Iron Mountain has a strong focus in data management and data protection. We take a data lifecycle approach in order to match up with how many of our customers view their IT operations. So we rotate and store tapes for backup and disaster recovery. We provide cloud services in these areas as well. As we see more and more organizations developing dedicated archiving strategies, we're also helping there. And when IT assets reach end of life, it's important to dispose of them securely in an agreeing manner. So we offer disposition services for all types of IT assets. But really today we want to focus the discussion on restoring data from legacy tapes and systems. So see the red highlighted box on the slide. This is a very common problem for both IT and for legal, especially in highly litigious and regulated industries such as financial services, healthcare, and others. Data restoration is where Iron Mountain and TDS have for years combined our perspective, and that's where we'll deep dive today. So businesses are rapidly evolving from many angles, whether through IT transformation, modernizing systems, moving to the cloud, or even through heightened recent M&A activity. In all of these instances, you'll likely be managing data differently after the event occurs than before the change occurred. So the path to existing data that you have today or that you have from a legacy perspective is not always planned, and it's very, very infrequently a clear path. So based on our experience, we really see IT heavily involved with data management in these scenarios, but we don't often see legal involved up front. So in that sense, we're creating a problem, right? The true user of the data isn't usually playing a key role in ensuring that that data is accessible to them when they need it. In our view, legal should have a seat at the table with IT when we're planning these initiatives and changes, because that's the best way to avoid creating a confusing, essentially inaccessible mass of legacy data going forward. So that's a brief overview of what we'd like to talk about today. With that, I'll hand off to Chris to take us through a few scenarios of what good and bad planning look like. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate that. Yeah, I've got 4 examples I wanted to just walk through today. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. The first one I wanted to give you a sense of. This is kind of the worst case scenario we could imagine with a large customer of ours, a very large, well-known hotel. Their situation was they were taking. They had decided they had been had outsourced their IT for many, many years, and had taken the decision to insource or take control back of their systems. And that meant they were going to essentially be setting up a brand new IT organization and simply migrate some of the, in this case, the email for all their C-level and, corporate offices over to a new system. It sounds like a pretty simple idea because it was almost like a clean break. It was a brand new setup. The worst case scenario occurred. It turns out that the migration, when they switched over the accounts to the new system, it didn't take. There were some issues. There was some corruption. And normally in any IT world, that's when you go back to the last backup available and be able to, access that and retrieve all your lost information. The problem with that was they had fired the previous outsourced company, and they had no plan, a real solid decommissioning plan in place where they actually validated, all the information that they were handed from the previous supplier or the outsourcer, and ultimately they had tapes. They had particular tapes that were completely unaccessible because they were encrypted, and those keys had been deleted or no longer were managed by the outsourcer because their job was done. And furthermore, any catalog information of those tapes was actually lost because, again, that was shut off by the IT outsourcer when the contract expired. So literally there was no way these tapes could be accessed. This particular format was such that the tapes couldn't even really be cataloged. because of the nature of the way they were created. So what we had here is the worst case scenario where a customer really lost years and years of information because they really didn't think through the decommissioning. They did not have a decommissioning plan or a validation plan to take that data and make sure everything was okay before they shut it off, or put the provisions in place with the IT outsourcer to make sure that they retained information for a sufficient amount of time or handed over the information appropriate before they actually, completed the contract. So this is an example where I think, legal could have helped in terms of, if they were involved in this, to insist upon, the validation. Obviously, there was, a lot of contractual discussions going on here with the outsourcer and the previous company. So these are the types of things that if you handle proactively, you could avoid. This is one of the horror stories that we've come across, and to be honest, it's one of the worst, and it's had far-reaching implications. The next example is a little different in the sense that it is. Let me click here. Is that it involves some unintended consequences from acquisition. We were involved in a large pharmaceutical company who had acquired a company. And they had known that this company, in their due diligence, had some open litigation and had a pool of tapes, some 30,000 backup tapes that were on legal hold. The records and all the information around those tapes were not preserved when they completed the integration of the new company. The merged company into the parent company, and all of the know-how and knowledge and memory was essentially lost. So the purchasing pharmaceutical company ends up having 30,000 tapes on their hands. The only thing they really know is they have these tapes were preserved because they were on legal hold, and they had no real way of attacking or understanding what they had. And, that's one of those things where, what we were able to do and step in with them was to help them not only figure out physically where everything was, but actually try to rebuild that institutional memory by interrogating these tapes. And, the result now, after, literally over a year's worth of work, was to be able to put this back to a situation where we had complete visibility over the contents of the tapes. We knew where all the particular data was, how it was read. We were able to put and organize it in such a way that it could be, easily retrieved when needed. All this work took over a year when it should have been able, if the planning and the validation had been done up front, to be able to do this the day after the merger went through. So again, these are two different situations, but you can see how planning, not having the proper plan in place and not thinking through and validating things up front really can create problems. All of these, in both cases, these were, not necessarily, mistakes. The actual people in IT did exactly what they were told. They just weren't told to do what was needed, and they didn't understand the requirement. So the next example, if I slide over, is a insurance company, and this shows a dynamic we're seeing more and more of. Companies are constantly changing their technological platforms as they adjust their businesses. They're moving to, different technologies to run their business or to protect, do their data backup. And yet the IT folks are still, especially in certain, highly litigated or highly regulated industries, are still required to maintain access to data, going back several years, multiple years. Even if it's just for regulatory purposes. And this is a good example of an insurance company that we've worked with that, the more that time went on and the more they made every technology change that they made, put them farther and farther away from their oldest legacy system. And what we ran into was a general counsel who was extremely dissatisfied with the time it took for his day-to-day IT department to respond to what he would even view as the simplest small tape requests. They came to us when they had a larger request, and we were able to demonstrate that, we had the expertise to be able to do this in a more, efficient and effective manner very fast. But he started looking at, he realized after he started studying the problem was that the IT department was really not equipped, and it really wasn't their. This was a very difficult task for them to be able to ask them to keep this information, to keep these systems up enough to be able to respond to these e-discovery requests of these older systems. In fact, the IT department have more and more systems to maintain as they move the technology, because they weren't getting rid or relieving themselves of the burden of dealing with the older systems that they now quote unquote decommissioned or became legacy systems, because they still had to maintain access to the data. So it was actually a compounding problem, and it was starting to really affect the ability for them to respond to requests, and in fact, it was actually affecting their day-to-day operation, or their prime objective of keeping the business running from an IT perspective, because the resources weren't getting any bigger, but the demands and time and different systems to manage was becoming quite acute. So what we were able to do is essentially take that off the IT's shoulders. So now Iron Mountain is essentially the service provider for the general counsel's office, where we're like their, they dial us instead of IT for any retrieval. So we've turned the retrieval of all these legacy systems, and it's up to I think 4 or 5 now, where we're able to retrieve the information as if they picked up the phone and called their IT department. We act in that role, and it's turned into now, ironically, it's turned into something that is far more efficient, and it's repeatable. It's a standardized process that is only dedicated to retrieving their information off these systems, and now it's extremely predictable. And that has made everybody happy, and we were able to debride a lot of tension and anxiety, and quite frankly sometimes animosity between legal and IT, because both were in an impossible position. And that is something that we see a lot of, but in this particular case, it was particularly acute. The next example I wanted to give you a sense of is of a company that's doing it. That's company is doing it right. One of our global entertainment clients we had been providing restoration services for, and they had known us, they had worked with us quite a bit, and they had done a large merger. And what they knew as part of this, when they were acquiring this company, because of their knowledge of the services we were providing, they actually factored that in ahead of time and proactively and said, we know there's information, there's systems, there's data, that litigation that is going to overhang from the previous company, this merger. So they actually had us go in advance and help the customer identify those systems. We safely decommissioned all of that equipment and all of that information, and validated that we knew where everything was before they could shut the data center down, take all the systems offline, liquidate the equipment, liquidate the space, all that. They were able to proactively put that into their plan, to where now they, from day one, they were able to respond and have access to this information. And again, it also freed up IT, because IT was able to focus on, integrating the live systems and, really what is the day-to-day business priority. And it took that burden off of them. It saved them a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of pain, which is quite important. And now it actually has enabled them, as they acquire more and integrate, the integration continues in terms of IT operations around the world. They now have a template and a plan in place to be able to address this as if and when they do it. And we see several of our customers worldwide now seeing that. And I think that's the point where if legal is aware of these types of issues and how this can bite you, to understand ahead of time to deal with this now, because what we end up seeing is 2 or 3 years down the road, if no care is taken with these integrations and these changes, these are little nuggets that that sooner or later will have to get dug up and dealt with in a crisis manner. And that is never the most optimal way to deal with a problem. So, John, that's it for these examples, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. So now that we've heard the good and the bad, from a counsel perspective, ask yourself a scenario, right? If you had 6 weeks to satisfy the e-discovery component of a pending legal case, would you be ready in time? If the answer is no, there are real consequences, and Chris just hit on a few of them. So you could face court-induced fines and penalties. You could have your brand significantly tarnished and damaged. Think of your firm's name in the news for penalties and not being able to produce important data for a high-profile case. You face increased operational costs to retrieve the data, especially as you have your IT organization do things that are outside of their comfort zone. And of course, all along the way, you're losing time against strategic initiatives to again stand up against this firefight and try to get this legacy data back, for which there may or may not have been a plan. So this is a big set of consequences if you're not actually prepared. So what does a restoration assurance program look like? A good program to beat the good scenarios that Chris described. So you want to be prepared up front. You want to have your legacy media managed from a storage perspective, and you also want to have the catalogs and the managed service provided by a trusted partner. So Iron Mountain's Restoration Assurance Program, in partnership with TDS, provides that end-to-end managed service. So what do you get from a fully managed program like the Restoration Assurance Program? You have access to the information you need when you need it. You have SLAs that are agreed to, so time frames are not a question. You know that you can meet those requests on time reliably. You have an SOW that's in place that stipulates not only the time frames but also the pricing up front. The process is defensible, auditable, and repeatable. So you have a legal standing to say, hey, look, I have a program in place that gets me where I have to be, and I can replicate it. You mitigate risk to the organization from compliance, from fines, from, again, wasting your valuable IT time on things that are not strategic by outsourcing. And you're really saving costs across a number of different angles, from a legal perspective, a business perspective, and an IT perspective. So that's really the Restoration Assurance Program in a nutshell. It's a managed service that is really designed to outsource this problem of legacy data restoration and take the burden off of legal, take the burden off of IT, and generally provide a better solution to this burning issue.
John, I would just add, one of the things that we see every single day is, the universality of this problem, and it's only getting worse. The fact that you're seeing, everybody knows the technology is changing very, very rapidly, and what that means is in an organization is that these types of issues and looking back and making sure you maintain access to this type of information over time is becoming more and more acute. It's not getting any less. It's getting worse, and we're seeing that. And I think the most important thing we can stress today is to keep that in the back of your mind when you're hearing in your organization a technology change. Think about the implications around the information that you rely on or that you're going to need to access, and how you can assure that is maintained. Because IT is doing their job, and their job is to make sure that the company is running on a day-to-day basis, and their understanding and their perspective is pretty much from that place, and not necessarily from the information management or information governance perspective. And there are very easy ways of creating some long-term consequences if these things aren't thought of at that time. And I would just stress that. So whether it's the Restoration Assurance Program is a piece of this, but the other part is to make sure that that the organization is really looking at this holistically, and not just from a technical transformation or a technology transformation or the efficiencies or downsizing or that it's actually looked at from the consequences of the data itself.
So with that, Dave, I think Chris and I have set our pieces on the slides. I think we're ready to open it up for the Q&A.
Okay, great. Well, Chris and John, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And not surprisingly, the discussion has sparked some questions from our audience. So in the time we have left, let's turn to those. And a reminder that we'll get to as many questions as we can in the time we have remaining, and if we aren't able to get to yours during the program, we'll be sure to follow up with you by email after we've signed off today. So with that, let's get to our first question. and that is why would an organization choose a data restoration program over an on-demand data restoration project? And either one of you gentlemen can take a crack at that one.
So, Chris, why don't I go first, and then you can add your perspective
Sure.
as well. So, from my perspective, really the benefit of a program is that you essentially have put Iron Mountain and TDS on a retainer such that you're prepared at a moment's notice to do a restore from your legacy catalog as soon as that need arises. Basically, the pump is primed. Your tapes are at Iron Mountain. TDS is managing your catalog. The moment that you have to go back through that legacy data and find emails from 5 years ago or 7 years ago or whatever the data is, all you have to do is pick up the phone, call Iron Mountain, and we very quickly know which tapes to pull and which data to restore. So if you want a program that allows you that SLA and the performance characteristics of being set up to go when you need it, program's the way to go. So we also offer project on demand, but in that case we often have the firefight scenario where we're getting customers calling and saying, hey, look, I have a whole stack of tapes. I need this information back. I'm not sure which tapes have the information. I sort of might have to restore all of them, right? And you obviously don't want to go through the labor and the cost of restoring or checking into all your tapes to see where your information is, but you're sort of in that firefight scenario where you kind of have to do it, right? So we actually see a lot of customers that come for the one-time project, and they say, hey, look, the outcome of this project was great. It would be even better if I were set up and had everything, all the upfront stuff taken care of such that I could just pick up the phone and call, right? So the benefit of a program from my perspective is really having that pump prime to do this restore on demand as quickly as possible. I'll leave it to Chris to fill in or add more perspective.
Right. No, I would say the real issue is about the risk and the responsibility that your organization wants to take in terms of maintaining knowledge about the contents of those tapes and where everything is. Our restore capability is available on demand or through the program, and to be honest, the technical execution of restoration, while complicated and difficult, is relatively straightforward. It's the understanding of where everything is, how the tapes are laid out, and we kind of maintain the institutional knowledge of where everything is. So the location and the targeting and the fulfillment becomes almost is holistic alongside the actual technical execution of the restoration. That's the real benefit of the program, and that's what we're seeing. As John said, a lot of customers who start with us as the fire department, actually come in and ask us then to, hey, let's put this in and let's take real control and really mitigate the risks of accessing this information and put it into a program. It's far more than just the restoration capability.
Excellent. Well, we have another question here in the queue, and that is, why is outsourcing data restoration services a better option than using internal resources?
Well, I could take that one, John, if you want, just from
Go ahead, Chris.
I think, look, the facts are that there are, IT budgets are not getting any bigger. You're not getting more people, more resources to handle the day-to-day operations of IT, and at the same time, companies are dramatically increasing the number of systems that they're running, the methods in which they're maintaining and backing up, and keeping control over these. So IT is not getting any less busy; they're getting more busy. They're also with the burden of this particular type of task and going back in time and going back and maintaining access to this information can be very distracting, not only to the day job of the IT folks, but just by definition, their capability and their memory and their technical capability, is by definition going to degrade over time because they're maintaining the current systems. So you end up, it's not just a pain for IT. I mean, IT, it's about just not enough people to do the job. But I think from a broader perspective, the company's perspective, it is a significant increase in risk to ask IT to try to do this. And quite frankly, ask any IT guy, their preference would be to get this off their shelf because they've got too much to do as it is with their day job.
John, anything to add there?
No, I'd absolutely echo that. I think Chris hit the nail on the head by saying it's no one's actual day job. I mean, most of the companies that we have under this program, they don't or they didn't have a person who was just sitting there in their IT organization waiting for a restore request to come in. Right? It's not something that typically happens, daily or hourly or by the minute. It happens every once in a while, but it's very important when it does happen. Right? So you very easily wind up in this firefight situation if you haven't outsourced it and put it under a repeatable program. So I think Chris hit it perfectly.
The one thing I would add, just to make sure we didn't also talk about, is the money. If it's not just saving the human, the IT guy from time, but the actual cost savings of eliminating the reliance on the equipment, on the data center space, on the power, on the cooling is dramatic, and can actually be reapplied or reallocated, so to speak, to providing a better day-to-day service. So, in a way, by taking this burden off, you should be elevating the level of service provided by IT to the organization on a day-to-day basis, while significantly reducing cost. Why wouldn't they do that?
Indeed, and this next question speaks to maybe one of the activities that time can be reallocated toward, and that is what are some of the biggest challenges that an internal IT department faces in the process of doing restoration work?
So, Chris, let me start with this one, then you can come in on top again, and that would be great. So one of the biggest challenges is when you're going back 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, especially when looking for data off of old, legacy backup tapes. The tape format, the backup software format that it was written in has to be present when you're doing the restore. So in a lot of cases, the hardware has to be present and the software has to be present. If you go back in time, any significant number of years, you probably don't have that stack set up, or maybe you're maintaining it and just for the sole purpose of doing a restore at some point. You don't really know if it works in some cases, right? Another thing is you go that far back and you might not have the skill in your organization anymore to go back and do that restore, even if you do have the system. So I think some of the big challenges, like Chris said, are around having the right skills, having the right environment, really having the right focus in order to go back and do this type of thing. We see pretty frequently that customers are really having a hard time getting back at their data under these conditions. So I'll defer to Chris as well here.
Yeah, John's absolutely right. I don't want to defy all of my friends in IT, but you have to imagine that this is when folks like in this audience request information from IT, they want to be able to fulfill the request, and I doubt they really, in many cases, at least we know of, they don't really share with the requester of the information all of the things that they have to do to even start the attempt to access this stuff. So it's one of those things that, good communication actually helps. This is very, very difficult technically anyway, and sometimes IT is used to being asked for things that are either impossible or difficult. These things are particularly thorny and rarely end well. And what we would recommend, and we try to sensitize folks on the legal side, is to just enough to know that this is complicated and hard, and that we advise you to probe deeper when you're asking IT for something, to make sure that they're explaining to you what they have to do, and to explore that confidence level, because it is generally high risk, and I guarantee you when you hang up the phone after talking to IT, there's very interesting conversations that occurred from a technical level of these guys trying to figure out how to overcome all the problems that John just laid out, and that generally is the origin of the pain and the pressure and the consequences of unsuccessful retrievals. And, that's something that, we see it in almost every organization to some degree or another, that dynamic.
Excellent. Well, we have another question and plenty of time to dig into it here. How can I tell if my organization or company is prepared to restore their data in the event of a lawsuit?
Chris, you want to lead off on this one?
Yeah, well, and remember, I think just the nature of that question, it is actually, only showing one dimension of the problem. The actual technical execution of a restoration, I need to retrieve this information off this piece of media or this particular source or anything like that, is a technical function which has its own, matrix of things that you need to have to be able to do that. The bigger problem of the two, beyond that, is actually, can I identify where the data I'm actually needing to restore might be? And so those two things combine to create the conundrum, and some of the pain. So, the first thing I would say is, how good is your organization right now at identifying where your data is? Where are your email backups or your system backups or your document, your document store backups, or, where are they located? Do you know? At what level can you see that? At what resolution can you see that? That is a question first that you can see, how good is the organization at maintaining those records or maintaining that targeting, as we call it. Then as a separate conversation is, okay, if I can find what I'm looking for, based on the records or the catalogs or the indexes that we keep, can I actually technically reproduce it? That is a relatively simple question, but whether it's a yes or no answer if they can really do it, and they can prove it if they can't. But the things you have to consider there are, how long does it take? Do they have to actually build anything? Is it an existing process? Do they test this process on a regular basis? And ultimately, you have to demonstrate that capability. Can it be done? Has it been done? Generally, we find customers that we've talked to about, providing our services, many of them have either had a bad experience where they already know the answer to those kind of questions, right? Or they already have a sense that either A, it's possible, but it's really, really hard and very disruptive, or they have a very bad suspicion that, nobody, that's, like the companies that, bought a company and they have, complete pockets of information that they have absolutely no idea of, they tend to be, they tend to kind of, come to that realization rather quick, and say, I need to, I really don't think we have any capability. It's really asking the questions both from a targeting perspective, and the technical side is actually quite straightforward. But I would say the most important thing we see with our customers is, do you know where everything is? And we all know that that's a big challenge.
So, Chris, just on that point, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the validation that occurs between the catalog and the tape set when we actually bring in a program. So TDS manages the catalog, and one of the steps that they do is make sure that the tapes in the actual physical tape set match up with essentially the mall map of backup sessions, et cetera, in the catalog, right? And pretty frequently, I think we see tape sets that are either larger than the catalog indicates or smaller, meaning that there are actually more tapes than the customer knew they had, or tapes are missing, right? So, Chris, you want to talk about that a little bit as a challenge? We've definitely seen it.
Right, absolutely. And one of the things that we do with the program is it starts with the whole purpose of this program is really kind of is creating a guaranteed and defensible process, and that requires a lot of validation up front. And John points out, one of the things that we do when we validate and onboard a customer, essentially we're taking over that information and those tapes and that any catalog information and indexing information, and we're going to validate it to make sure that the tapes we have match the tapes in the catalog. And if there are differences, we have to remediate those and figure out where you're missing 10,000 tapes because you have 10,000 tapes in the catalog that you don't have on the shelf, or vice versa. We can mitigate that and work through it. But also being able to commit and actually validate that this data is the data that we think it is. Let's do some test restores, so we have it in place. So when and if, we actually have a compliant solution. Many times we have customers that, we have very, very few restores that we have to do for a particular system that we take on, but the value of having a documented, compliant process that is actually tested on a regular basis has great currency for the end client, whether it's for regulatory purposes or just their own internal compliance, compliance standards. These are the most important piece of the puzzle, and ultimately what clients are seeing real long-term value in, because it's something that we're going to be able to take care of this data, be able to manage this data and retrieve this data as long as it is required, and that is something that that people are coming around to more and more as something that has a lot of value.
Excellent. Well, we have another question here, and this one has to do with some of the red flags that might suggest action needs to be taken. But what are some of the red flags to be aware of when IT is making technology changes within an organization? What are some of the indicators that you'd look for?
So I'll lead with one big one that we see from Iron Mountain perspective all the time, and then I'll ask Chris for his input. But one of the things that we've absolutely seen is a big-time appetite to at least investigate the cloud. So move your backup and disaster recovery from tape to the cloud, because it's perceived as newer technology or somehow better, which is absolutely debatable. But we see a lot of customers coming to us saying, hey, I want to move to the cloud and get away from tape. And the question that I always ask is, okay, well, that's fine. We understand that the environment's changing and people want to do cloud, and we can help you with that. But what are you going to do with all the data from today back, right? So start tomorrow on cloud, right? All your data goes there, and you manage it a different way. But what are you going to do with your retention data that's 5, 7, 10 years mandated by law to keep, or even infinity in some industries, right? So this all goes back to the concept of the plan, right? It's great to do technology change and move forward in a new way, but it's absolutely incumbent, if you're going to be successful at battling litigation or being compliant with your data, that you have a plan for the older stuff as well, right? So that's a huge red flag. And anytime I have a conversation with one of our customers or prospects about it, I always ask that question, and a lot of them haven't thought about it. And so it's definitely something that I think we're trying to educate and help with in our customer base.
Yeah, I would say that IT is always focused on the problem of today and tomorrow. So any technology change, whether it's the cloud or I'm upgrading my I'm starting new systems that are going to be managed entirely different. Any of those are areas that, if I'm in the legal department and I hear or I read in the company email where, these are some technology changes we make, I think that more and more, if you will, think about it, most of the effort, time, planning, budgeting, all that goes into, because we've sat in these meetings from the IT perspective, are all focused on, the end result. And rarely, if at all, are they ever really the requirements at the front end of that endeavor have anything to do with maintaining what do we do with what we leave behind. That is a real problem that we see, and it's almost universal in the sense, because it makes sense. The IT guys are thinking about this thing from a go-forward position. They're looking at the budget savings. Coming down to consolidating data centers or decommissioning systems. To them, a decommissioning is, okay, I've moved all my mailboxes over to the new mail system. I can shut the old one down and I'm done. I just turn it off. That's to them decommissioning. So, the real anytime there's that type of activity going on in a company, which is arguably everywhere. Everybody is changing something technologically in their company. That there has to be someone that speaks for the people or the consumers or the customers that need to have access to this data. They're rarely at the table, and that would be the one message I would stress to this audience, is to make sure that you're being heard, because eventually you're going to inherit this problem one way or the other. 2 years down the road, someone's going to say, we need to exit. The only place this could possibly be is on, the old system backups or the old, these old tapes. And I would just say one thing about tapes is, more data is being written to tape today than ever before. It's more for archival purposes. Tape is becoming more and more of an archival format and less of a disaster recovery asset, for very good reasons. But most of this data, is the most efficient way for it to reside, and safest play for it to reside is long-term is on tape. So this isn't going away. And, this is the circle of life in IT. This is a problem that, they were dealing with in 1984, 1974, 1994, 2004. It's the same thing. Technology is always changing, but now it's happening much faster. And that's causing even more of these disconnects in terms of accessing this information reliably.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to wrap things up. So, John or Chris, if you do have any closing remarks to sort of button things up here before we say goodbye, I'll give you an opportunity to offer those remarks now.
Well, from an Iron Mountain perspective, we really appreciate everyone's time joining this important call. We really want to help people out. We want to help our customers out, and it's painful sometimes to see customers dig themselves into a hole and then have a really hard time getting out. We're absolutely here to help. We want to help in this particular scenario where getting back legacy data, if there hasn't been good planning from a legal, business, and an IT perspective jointly, can be a really tough thing to solve, and we're in good position to help. So thank you for joining, and we look forward to conversing if it makes sense.
Absolutely. I would just say we appreciate your time, and obviously, this is an issue that isn't going away, but we appreciate your time and everything we can do to help. We're happy to help.
Indeed, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting this issue sometime soon. But for today, that's a wrap. On behalf of Inside Counsel, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Special thanks to John Sharp and to Chris Clark for sharing their insights with us today, and thanks to Iron Mountain and Trusted Data Solutions for helping bring us this event. A reminder that if you missed any part of today's webcast or would like to suggest it to a colleague, it will soon be archived and available for viewing at InsideCounsel.com. And also be sure to check the resources widget on your console, for some takeaway goodies. And with that, I'll wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.